And then a window next to you is of Mr. Saurav Kirpal. He is a very eminent advocate and lawyer who was the one who fought the case for the community over there. Is Navtesh joining us?
Yeah, very much so. He's on board. He's joined us already.
Has he joined us?
I'm here.
Hi.
Hi, Manish.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks.
Thanks for joining. I'll just take another few minutes and then we can start if it's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there are some technical snacks going on with some. There I have my friend, philosopher guide, Pushpej Pant, my professor. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well under the circumstances.
That's great. Lovely. So I think my computer station is working. I'm going to my station and Mr. Madhusich will join us. Thank you. Sunil, can you hear me?
I can.
Sunil, since you are going to be moderating the program, how do we make a flow? I mean, just take a 2 minute. It's basically I come and then I speak few words. I introduce Mr. Matthias and you. And thereafter I give the flight.
Could you give me the names for the lady and the gentleman who are joining us from?
Yeah, this is. We have Anna Zoot is there.
Anna Zoot, yes.
And then who else has joined us? Anna, who has joined us?
Peter Funk and Moses Yvonne, also from the Hosey Vienna.
Mr. Funk, Peter Funk has joined us already?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, hi, good afternoon, India time. Thanks for joining us.
So I got Anna Zoot, and who's the other person?
Another is Peter Funk.
Give me the name again.
Peter Funk.
Peter. Lovely.
And the other is Moses Yvonne.
Hi.
Good to meet. I'm here.
And then
I got Peter. I got Anna Zoot. I missed the third name.
And then I think so. We have Mr. Yvonne also. Moritz Yvonne.
Hello.
Hi. So these are 3 partners who are joining us from Vienna.
I'm live now, darling. I'll call you after an hour and a half.
So what we do now is, Sunil, how would you like to patronize the? I mean, make it more of an
opening. I would make an opening remark, really talking about how things are catalyzed.
Yes.
And something which was long in process. We would not claim to be the first people who really fought for this.
Right.
There was a whole precedent. There were a whole line of very worthy people who did the groundwork, as it were. And then, of course, we were the spark that sort of ignited the whole thing. And we were very fortunate because we had Saurav, we had Manika Goswami, we had Lgbtiq. So I would just like to get into that. And then very briefly sort of talk about where we are at, I think, right now, and how it is just a building block, and the struggle is long and extended.
No. Yeah, sorry, I think so. I couldn't explain you properly. Would you like to take it as a debonair, as a more of a discussion level, one-to-one, or would you like to?
I would like it to be a participative discussion.
Participative. Okay.
Yeah.
So
we'd be
let's
interested to see what is happening in Austria.
And Austria, yes.
We'd be interested in the parallels, if any, and we'd be also keen to point out similarities as well as differences in the struggle here.
Right. So, I mean, I think so. Let's take off from there then.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let's start.
Okay.
Shall we start then?
Yeah. Then I'll just say the welcome note. Well, thank you everybody. Good afternoon to you, India time and Austrian. I mean, I have a special welcome for our Austrian guests. Please immediately to the Austrian guests, I'm saying if they are having some problem in listening, just raise your hands, or if there is any problem, just raise the hand so that we can stop the conversation and see what your problem you're running into. I'd like to welcome. We have a very prestigious and very intellectual participation from India, who are going to be covering from the legal angle, from the historical angle, even from the mythological angle, from the social economical angle to this particular movement, and how and where this movement stands now in India is something we'll come to know of it. Before that, I'd like to welcome, first of all, Mr. Matthias Radostic, the Shashdi Affairs Acting Ambassador of Austria. Welcome, Mr. Radostic, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity, because without your intervention, definitely this program would have not been on air today. Before I hand it over the mic to you, I'd like to welcome Mr. Sunil Mehra, very eminent journalist, author, and activist of LGBTIQ. Then I have Mr. Navtej Singh over here. Hi, thanks joining us. Mr. Navtej is at the moment, he is, please correct me if I'm wrong, you're also, you're teaching in one of the university, Ashoka University, if I'm not mistaken, you're a professor. At the same time, he is a winner of a very prestigious award, which is related to art and culture. It's called Sangeet Natak Academy Award. And he is very, very famous, eminent Indian classical dancer. At the same time, he is a very prominent activist for LGBTIQ movement. Then we have Mr. Saurav Kirpal, who will navigate us through the legal galleys of this particular movement. Mr. Kirpal is working for the Supreme Court of India and has been very prominently working for the movement of Article 377. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Saurav Kirpal. Thanks for joining us. And thank you. And then we have none other, my friend, philosopher, guide, Professor Pushpesh Pant, who is a historian, and he is Professor Emeritus and ex-dean of the School of Law of North Cap University, who will navigate us through not only the historical aspects, but at the same time, mythological and the legal view also. And before we continue, I'll ask Sunil that I just take 2 minutes to invite Mr. Radostic to open up the session. And then he will hand it over officially to you. Fine, Sunil?
Yes, absolutely.
Fine. Okay, Mr. Adustich, may I request you to kindly say a few words so that the program gets started.
Okay. Thank you, Munish. Thank you, everyone. As Munish said, my name is Matthias Radostic, and I'm the Chargé d'Affaires of the Austrian Embassy here in Delhi. I think also our Austrian participants have read in the media, in the Austrian media, that we are having very difficult times in India for the time being, in particular in Delhi. And I think all the Indian participants can confirm this. The numbers of COVID infections have skyrocketed, and the health system is basically completely overwhelmed. We will have 2 relief flights coming in from Austria to support the Indian government. So the first relief flight will be on tomorrow. And the second, sometimes during next week, we don't know exactly when. So we are facing some challenging and difficult times, because you can imagine it's not always easy to get the relief items through customs, but we are working on it. So with that being said, as you know, LGBTIQ rights are one of the focus of Austrian foreign policy, particularly in multilateral fora. Austria is trying to, promote those rights. Although we will probably hear from the Austrian side, Austria was not always among the first movers in this field. But at least the foreign ministry has declared it one of the priorities of our foreign policy now. There have also been some very, very important developments in India in the past few years in this field that we will hear. So, and we thought it would be a good idea to bring Indian activists, Austrian activists, together to have an exchange of view to compare notes, and probably to take it from there. We'll see what comes out of it. So welcome everybody. Thank you very much for participating, and I hand over to you, and please go ahead. Thank you very much.
And before Sunil, I'll just take a minute. I'd like to introduce our Austrian partner. Anna, I will introduce you, and then you can introduce your colleagues to us. Anna Sutz is a Polish-German citizen. She has studied political science at the University of Vienna, and she is a queer feminist activist, and currently she is the managing director and secretary general of Hosi Wien organization. Am I correct? Did I leave any part?
That is correct. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, so then I will introduce my colleagues who are also working with me for our association Hosi Vienna. It's Peter Funk, who is our Officer of International Affairs and Treasurer, and Moritz Yvonne, who is the current association secretary and former president. Yeah, Moritz, Peter, do you want to say a bit more about yourself?
Actually, you said most of the stuff. I was responsible for the youth work of Hosi Wien, like for our service for young LGBT people for a decade or so. So this is like the other part of the activism, but not relevant here, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. I think you said everything that's important at the moment.
Shall we carry this forward? Munish, shall we carry this forward now?
I think Manish has disappeared on us, but you can start probably, Sunil.
Sunil?
Yes, can we carry this forward?
I think so, Sunil, you start with it. I'm having lots of technical snags and problems.
Okay. So, shall we
Mr.
start or
Sunil,
shall we wait?
Take over, please, Mr. Sunil. Let's move ahead. And we will solve the technical problems in the meantime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by welcoming our Austrian comrades in arms, really. And thank you, Saurav, for joining us. Thank you, Pushpesh, and of course, my partner, Naptej. Before we begin, I'd really like to emphasize the fact that people like Saurav, people like Naptej and I, are the last link in a long chain of activists and activism that started a good 15, 20 years ago. And so there were trailblazing PILs that were put forward to court. A lot of people participated and strived to make this thing happen. We happened to be the final spark that really set off the conflagration that resulted in really reading down of the law. So my gratitude to the people that preceded us. And of course, immense gratitude for people like Saurav, like Mireka Guruswamy, like Lgbtiq, who worked tirelessly pro bono to make this happen. How did it all start? It started off because an eminent justice of the High Court, a certain Mr. Singhvi, had rather a humorous exchange with another lawyer. And Saurav, correct me if I got the name wrong, was it Mukul Rohatgi, who was the Attorney General at that point in time?
It was the Solicitor General at that point.
It was the Solicitor General. And
another lawyer.
Mr. Singhvi quips, while they were hearing something on LGBT rights, he says, oh, I don't know if we have gay people in India. Do we have homosexual people in India? And the Solicitor General laughs and smirks and says, oh, no, sir, I'm not that modern yet, or I'm not that fashionable yet. Which was alarming. That degree of trivializing, that level of humor was somewhere reductive, insulting, and not cognizant of the immense torture that a whole community of people, a sizable number of the population had gone through for decades, for millennia. And that needed to stop. So Manika, Arundhati, Naptej and I got together one morning over coffee. And we decided that it was time to put faces to names, to tell them that people who live their lives in alternative ways, who make other choices, do not necessarily have tails or horns. They're not unicorns. They are your brother, your sister, your father, your cousin, your husband, your husband sometimes. And that they're contributing members of society, that they're not committed pedophiles, that they're not necessarily perverts, they just happen to march to a different drummer. And that is how Aisha Sood also came on board, Ritu Dalmia came on board, our friend Amarnath, the hotelier, came on board. And there was a certain groundswell, and the whole thing took off. Saurav would be better positioned to tell you where we are at right now. However, I must emphasize that this is really the first building block. In the sense, we've been decriminalized. In the sense, no cop can really arm twist you now and beat you up, sodomize you first, and then throw you into prison. Yeah, that happens a lot as well. But what about equal rights? What about the right to adopt? What about the right to inherit? What about the right to medical insurance together? What about the right to insurance together or inheritance insurance? We need to codify, we need to have laws that protect people with all those statutes as well. And that has yet to come into being. So having said that, I'm happy to open the house now, and maybe Saurav would like to say something on the legal aspect.
Certainly. Thanks, Sunil. I'll start off. And since we are in an Austrian setting, I suppose this reminds me of the line of a movie which we all saw as children, which is intimate connection with Austria, The Sound of Music. And in that, the first one of the lines which I always remember is, let's start from the very beginning, the very best place to start, right? So I think before we explain where we are today, I think a brief history of where we were is important. Let's start from the beginning. And the beginning is colonial section 377, which was incorporated in, I'm afraid I'm sure I'm speaking to some of you who already know this, but I'm speaking for the benefit of those who may not know. So section 377 was a provision in the Indian Penal Code, which came at the time of the British. As to whether we had homophobia even prior to that, I think Professor Pant would be better placed to discuss that, so I will leave that to him. But certainly, after that section came into being in 1860, sodomy became a crime in India. It wasn't a crime formally before, so it became a crime then. Of course, the Buggery Acts and all had a certain effect, but we'll leave the technicalities out of it. And the judgment and the case that Sunil is speaking of is where he was intimately connected, where he was a petitioner. The Supreme Court was moved and asked to rule on the constitutionality of section 377, which is the anti-sodomy provision. There was a long chart, a long line of cases that came along the way. The section was initially struck down by the Delhi High Court. The matter was taken in appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court initially reversed the High Court judgment, and that is the exchange that Sunil was talking of. Justice Singhvi, one of the earlier judges of the earlier bench, made less than charitable remarks about the queer community. But I believe that stems, and we can discuss that, that stems from a lack of awareness in the society. Unlike Sunil, I am probably less quick to judge, and I feel that we have a long task ahead of us to explain and educate. That, of course, happens in society, but since I'm a lawyer, it was my task to explain and educate the judges. And luckily, I think that had an impact, because when the judgment reversing the decriminalization came in 2013, there was a bit of an uproar I saw in the media, in the civil society. I think there was a sense even in the judiciary that we've done something wrong. So, as Sunil rightly said, two very dear friends of mine, Menaka and Arundhati, reached across, got this petition, and moved the Supreme Court directly in sometime in 2016, middle of 2016. The matter was pending for 2 years, and the matter was then heard in 2018, and a judgment came titled after Navtej here, Navtej and Johar versus Union of India, where 5 judges of the Supreme Court, what we call the Constitution Bench, which is when 5 judges sit together, they decide matters relating to interpretation of the Constitution, struck down, or rather read down the law. They said section 377, if it was to be read as criminalizing homosexual conduct, would be unconstitutional. And therefore they said that we will not read it as part of that. So they didn't strike it down. They said 377 does not cover homosexual conduct. But what was important was not just the reading down or the striking down of the section. If you read the judgment, it is like a charter of rights for the queer community in India. You know, the judgment was based not only on the fact that the state cannot interfere what 2 people do in private in their bedrooms. It was a lot more than that, the judgment. The judgment founded itself on the right of dignity and autonomy, not merely about privacy. It's not about 2 people hiding, but it's 2 people loving each other openly, 2 or more. I mean, we're not into polyamory, but this was a question of 377, so I'll restrict it to that. But the idea was the Constitution of India guarantees a sense of dignity, autonomy, self-worth, self-determination And in doing that, they relied on an earlier judgment, I think, which is even more important. Sometimes it's forgotten, which was delivered in 2013, the same time as the earlier reversal of the High Court, the Nalsar judgment. That was a judgment where the Indian Supreme Court recognized the rights of transgenders and recognized them formally as a third gender. So really for the last 8 years in India, we have formal recognition in the law of the trans community as a third gender. Now, whether they should be third gender because you get away from the binaries of the male and female, whether that is, those are matters of debate. But it was a progressive piece of decision making by our Supreme Court. So that is really the state of the law now. So we basically have protection of the trans community, which has now been translated into an act of parliament. Sodomy is no longer a crime. And we have this beautiful judgment with all the Charter of Rights, as I said, declaring that the queer community is entitled to the same rights as any other citizen. But of course, what we have is shadowed by that what we do not have. As Sunil said, we do not have an anti-discrimination code. But that's not unique to the queer community. We don't in India today have an anti-discrimination code even for women or minorities or lower castes. We don't have an anti-discrimination code at all. Now that's deeply problematic, so that needs to change. There is no gay marriage in India. There is no civil union. Consequently, all the rights of inheritance when someone dies intestate, the rights of access to a partner for medical health, those are all prohibited. And in India, at least the India we live in, it's not only about the formal mechanisms of the law. It's also how the law is practiced, which is important. So for instance, getting access to health insurance or opening a bank account together as a gay couple. There's nothing in the law which prohibits it. But you go to a bank in India and you speak to the bank manager will not open a joint bank account. So we need to go to court for these matters as well, which are not legal rights, but these are societal changes that we need. And we hope the court will push and use its moral authority. And it has considerable moral authority in India. The Supreme Court, as of now, has considerable moral authority. And we hope the court will use that. So in that light, we have filed a petition, which is coming up for hearing, I think, on next Thursday, seeking recognition of same-sex marriages. It's pending in the Delhi High Court. It's going to be heard. We shall see what the outcome of the judgment is. Obviously, we can't predict what happens in court, but we are hopeful because whenever you reach court, you should be hopeful, right? There's no point filing a case if you're not going to be hopeful. You don't file a case to lose. So we file that case. The battle ahead is long, it's arduous. It has to happen both with the law, the agency of the law, as well as civil society and activism. In India, I think there is less of that. I think there needs to be a lot more activism because the sector is possibly underfunded, because of the fear of people in coming out. We have a large number of people in the closet, so we haven't been able to make a movement, a mass movement, the way the queer community has been able to mobilize itself in the West. In India, we are on that path, but we have not quite reached there yet. I think we have time. We have to make an effort, a sincere effort, because law will not solve everything at all. So we also need organizations which will, I hope, change things. And I'm now speaking to the present and to the future, but maybe I can pass on the baton now to speak of the past and how we got here to Professor Pant, and maybe he can tell us about what his views are on what the scriptures or whatever else he wishes to speak on. Are you muted, Professor Pant? You are muted.
Thank you so much. I think you have put it brilliantly when you say the problem starts with the Indian Penal Code and Macaulay's.
Pushpesh, you have to speak a little louder.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I think as Saurav very brilliantly put, the problem starts with the Indian Penal Code, the British morality being imposed on us, not only the British, but the Christian evangelical morality, which put certain crimes against nature as criminal activities. If you go back to history, you have a person like Ardhanarishwar in our mythology, Shiva, which is a hermaphrodite incarnation, incorporating in his own body both the genitalia of the male and the female. You also have people, gender bending gods, which you talk about them right now, you might be threatened by vigilantes, where you say that when Shiva was being pursued by a demon, Vishnu assumed the form of Mohini, a very beautiful woman, so beautiful that the demon was of course destroyed, but started getting chased by Shiva itself. Now, unfortunately, I think in the day and time of India today, we have this risk of going back to past and saying this was our past where we were more liberal, which would only be partially true. We accepted same-sex relationships under certain circumstances. We had people who had boys they loved, who had, this whole lot of Urdu shairi, Sufi tasawwur, etc. But this was not mainstream life every day. Now, I think what I'm worried about is when we have a long battle ahead, I wish I were half as optimistic as Saurav about the courts, because I think what is happening is that the courts have been disappointing us tremendously, not about LGBTIQ rights, but all fundamental rights. When the corona crisis is on, corpses are piling upon corpses. Our government, in its infinite wisdom, is busy spending 20,000 crore rupees on a majestic monument to a megalomaniac folly, the Central Vista, or for instance, the new residential complex to the Prime Minister. Under these circumstances, without being partisan, I would find it very difficult to put all my trust in the court and say, the courts again would say, making laws is not its prerogative. It is the domain of the legislature. And what the legislature has been disappointing us very greatly. Let's not go back to hoary distant past. Let's come back to past decade or so. Shashi Tharoor was courageous enough to move a private member's bill about these rights in the parliament. And he was rebuffed very badly. He barely managed to get it introduced. The interesting part is this, that we have, when the debate takes place, and when the court asks the government to opine on the LGBTQI rights, the government's representatives, the SG or the AG or whoever that is, says the country is not right for this. We can't have same-sex marriages in India. Our culture doesn't allow it. Now, these self-styled custodians of Indian culture and moralities and Swadeshi values, from whether it is from protection of cows over the men and women and people who have, again, he sort of very rightly mentioned the rights or anti-discrimination practice against other minorities. Minorities, religious, linguistic, ethnic, what are called scheduled caste, bonded labor, children, prisoners, all those take a second level of priority. And they say, even the courts make pronouncements that we have more urgent matters to dispose of. At times, those more urgent matters are whether to hold an IPL match or not. And I think, what makes me particularly agitated, and I'll be brief, is something like the present regime accepting the rights of a particular kind of LGBTQI community called the Kinnaras. Now, for the first time in a super spreader of the corona in Kumbh Mela, in the akhadas, there was a Kinnar akhada also. And the government has no problems with the Kinnar akhada. As long as you have the people of indeterminate gender supporting the government's views on what is priority in terms of religion, in terms of superstition versus science, no problems. The rest of the time, this country's morality will not allow this. This is not part of our culture, and so on and so forth. So
thank you, Pushpish. I might have to cut you short right now because we'd like to have Nafej on board, and then we'd like to hear what the Austrians have to say about their end of things, right? Thank you. That was very illuminating. I particularly like the sort of the way the past resonates today, and how there are echoes of the same discrimination in the way this dispensation is dealing with minorities and much else. Navtej? Navtej?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, everybody. I'll be brief. I just want to share that when it comes to homophobia, I feel that homophobia in India is slightly peculiar and particular. It's not the same as it might be in Europe. And I have been told off by my queer friends very often when I have said that I think that India essentially is not a homophobic country. And I still feel that it is not, because I think the problems that are, I find three factors that factor into homophobia in India. One, of course, is homophobia. The second, which Saurav has already mentioned, I think that the most oppressive phenomena that India is subject to is patriarchy, and patriarchy of a misogynist kind that is unparalleled in the world. And third is a very, very discrete factor, because but I still want to mention it, and that is because, and I'll say why I mention it, because I'm a body practitioner. I'm a serious yoga practitioner and a dancer, and I feel that we live in a society where the idea overrules the body. And when it comes to the body is, desire is in the body, all shades of desire in the body. But over the last, particularly over the last 200 years, and even before then, there have been ideas that overrule the body and whatever it stands for. But in the 19th century, a particular, very peculiar kind of a nexus forms between the body dismissive Indian doctrines. Not all Indian religious doctrines are body dismissive. There are some that are orthodox and very mean to the body, like I would say the Christian doctrine. And then on top of it, it's coming into, and then the influence, of course, Victorianism, Protestantism particularly, and this whole Cartesian view of mind over body. So the nexus of a body dismissive doctrine, a Hindu doctrine, and post-Cartesian influence brings this very twisted mix. And then add patriarchy to it. So I think we are subject to a very twisted mix of all these things. And I feel that homophobia is actually incidental, because we are not essentially homophobic because I can tell you one thing. I'm homosexual and I live openly with a man, and I have never once suffered a homosexual slur. And this has to be registered, that this is also a reality of India. This is also, and I'm not saying that there's no homophobia. There is immense homophobia. I've had friends beaten up and trashed. But I really feel that this thing of patriarchy, which is, because if a boy is homosexual, then he is kind of compromising the whole model of patriarchy and male privilege, because it's not just that he's homosexual, he's threatening the whole patriarchal system, because he's betraying maleness and the privilege that comes with it. Like I have a cousin who's lesbian, and I've come away unscathed, and my poor cousin who's lesbian has suffered. She was forced into marriage. I got away being a boy. So I think there's also this, so I think the real problem that we have is very mean patriarchy, and this oppressive ideas which privilege ideas over the body, and of course then homophobia, which is there, but it's not very deep. I feel patriarchy and the body dismissive ideas are way deeper than homophobia, because homophobia is kind of like a take on. It's like, it's the 19th century. It's not that old. It's also alien. It's a foreign idea which hasn't quite taken root, because homosexuality is not written down as a sin in our books, so to speak, in the same way as homosexuality is a sin against God in Christianity and Islam. So it's not quite a sin. We are oddities. We are truly queer. They can laugh at us, but so there's a shade of difference when we talk of Indian homophobia. Yeah, I think that's what I'd like to say.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Navtesh, and I couldn't agree more. I'd be interested to hear Anna. Anna, does any of what we say here about the situation in India resonate with you? Are there similarities, or are there very striking differences?
I find it striking, and I would like to refer directly to you, Mr. Navtesh, right? Because you said these are like the 3 points you mentioned as differences between Austria or Europe and India, and I would say I don't see them as differences from my point. I see them more as similarities. I do think that homophobia in Europe is also very much connected with a toxic masculinity and in the core with patriarchic views, with patriarchy itself. And also the idea, which you said, this body dismissive Hindu doctrine, which you mentioned. I think this, I grew up in a Christian and very fundamentally radical environment. And this body dismissive doctrine is something I also experienced and I know from the Christian context. So I see some kind of similarity there. So it's very surprising for me that you said this is something like a difference, but I see this as a similarity. And some other thing I would like to mention is that what you previously said, Mr. Kirpal, that the problem in India is more like not about the law, but how law is practiced, right? We also have a problem here in Austria with that. For example, when it comes to reporting hate crimes, on the ground of sexual orientation and gender identity. We do have a good hate crime law and hate speech law, but the problem is exactly the same. It's how it's practiced. So now we have this problem that when people report hate crimes and they say to the police, I've been beaten up because the person saw me as a member of the queer community, as a gay, lesbian. That was the reason. They didn't want to write it down on the reports, but this is very important for the further case, because if it's written down, then the penalty later is harder. And when it's not written down in the previous report by the police, it's not taking into account. So it's really the problem about how law is practiced in reality. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say. What I saw is like similarity, but also maybe yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, because that really resonates with us, because right now this is exactly what's happening in India. Not only versus LGBTQ, it is also happening vis-a-vis all minorities. We have very, very defined laws. It's the flagrant non-observance of those, the contemptuous non-observance of those, which we're witnessing literally in the form of a carnage every day in this country for the last at least 7 years. Peter?
Yes.
Could I have your observations or insights on this, please?
Yeah, I find it interesting how different and on the one, and also how similar the developments are. I found the fact that the key is coming out. I think Mr. Kirpa stated that we had the same experience. The more people came out, the easier the transformation, also the legal transformation was. And I actually, yeah, we had the same situation. Like so we came out, we made our pride parades. There was this whole social development, and it's a historical fact and continuity here in Austria that the people of Austria are usually more liberal than the politics are. That's actually a historical fact here. And actually, the fun fact is when like Anna stated, when you talk with people like straight people who are not activists at all, and you tell them, hey, it's legal that coffee owner throws me out when I kiss my boyfriend. And they say, what? That's legal? That can't be legal. And it is legal. So the thing is, the people often assume that there is progress because the populace is so liberal. So they are actually confused that the politics are a bit behind on legal changes, or as Anna also stated, and as Mr. Navter stated, that the how law is lived is different.
I must say here, I must tell you that when Navtej and I were in New York, walking with another gay couple friend, we were specifically told, because we were passing an Italian neighborhood, and they said, no, please don't hold each other's elbow here. So, there were areas in the US where we felt more threatened and could have been threatened with physical violence in ways that we never, ever experienced back home. And as anybody who's ever been to India will testify to you, two men holding hands and walking, two men even hugging each other, even giving each other a kiss on the neck, is not considered so outre as a man and a woman doing the same thing. So it's not sexuality, but rather the projections of it that seem to elicit a hostile reaction.
Absolutely.
Very interesting, yeah. There was a third gentleman on the panel, and I plead guilty to not having caught his name. And I'd like him on board now, please, to contribute.
Moritz?
Yeah, I think,
Moritz,
yes.
I got it right, right? Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, by the way, if I pronounce any of your names wrong, please correct me. I'm trying my best. Sunil, I think that's one of the most interesting observations that you've made about holding hands in public, how that is, in some cultures, it's basically automatically sexualized, and in others it is not, and thereby can deliver some level of protection to LGBTIQ people. In European culture, generally, holding hands is sexualized in a way that seems to be not to be the same way in other countries or cultures. And I think that has very much to do with the particular influence of Christianity, and in most of Europe, that's in particular the Roman Catholic Church, which of course is the predominant religion in Austria as well. And I think that leads to basically the three trends that have really made a difference in Austrian development with regards to LGBTIQ issues. These are one, secularization. Basically, wherever a society becomes more and more secular, that people say, okay, it's fine to have a religion, but it's basically your own business. It doesn't have anything to do with my rights. Things start getting better. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church has lost a lot of its standing in Austria, as it has throughout the entire Western world, particularly throughout the past 25 years, when all the scandals about the rape of children have come to the forefront. They have become known. And of course, that has helped very much, because before, when clergymen would rant against LGBTIQ people, they had some moral authority, whereas now basically everybody thinks, well, you should not be talking about sexuality to begin with. And it really has made a huge change. I think the two other big trends that really have made some progress in Austria, they're strikingly similar to what you have been telling us about the Indian development. One is, of course, activism and making it personal. I think it was you, Sunil, who said basically once you put faces to LGBTIQ people, once people realize, okay, that's my brother, that's my friend, that's my cousin, that's my sister, It's not this weird other kind of person. It's not it's not something that you've only heard rumors about and are perhaps scared, perhaps disgusted by. You could just as well assume it doesn't exist. And that really has made a huge difference. When people started coming out and when the LGBTIQ community really has made that a focus point of its activism, that really has changed a lot in society. Just as well, by the way, as popular culture, all the films featuring LGBTIQ people that have come out in the past 20 years, that they really have helped a great deal as well, because basically many people who are ill-educated or a bit uncomfortable with LGBTIQ people, they're not necessarily mean-spirited. Many of them are just uneducated. They don't know any better. And basically, once they become more familiar with it, once they're actually forced to think about the issue for the first time, perhaps, that really starts a thought process. It starts a discussion, and that's basically the only point how they can, how anything can ever change. Yes, of course, that's also very important in how the law is interpreted. I think you, Saurav, said that's really what it comes down to in the end, because even judges on a Supreme Court or on a constitutional court, that they're only humans as well living in our society, and how they view other humans makes a great deal of difference in how they interpret what's written down in the Constitution, for example. And that has been the last of the big three trends that really have made a difference in Austria. All the legal requirements. Basically, as Peter said, we don't really have progressive politics, only every once in a while. But every once in a while, we get some political progress, and then the courts do the rest in Austria. For example, we had same-sex civil unions in 2010. Now, it was very, very similar to marriage, although not exactly the same thing. And there were a few things that were just plain nasty bits of discrimination against queer couples. But it was about rights such as being insured together, having health insurance. So it was quite important.
You have that.
Yes, we do have that. And that's why it was so important. And that's why we, as the LGBTIQ community, were very, very happy to get this compromise. And then over the next couple of years, people went to the courts about the different bits of discrimination that were still in the civil unions. And one by one, our constitutional court said, this is not justified. This bit of discrimination here, there is no basis in reason. There is no good reason to have this bit of discrimination. There is no relevant difference between a couple of the same sex or of different sexes. So this little bit of discrimination needs to go. And then in 2019, and in 2017, the ruling came down. There was a final court case where people said, well, all those different bits of discriminations are gone. So now basically there is no relevant difference between civil union and marriage after all. So basically there is no good legal reason to keep marriage separate and only for heterosexual people.
Good Lord, you seem to be in a happier place. You seem to be in a much happier place than we are.
We're very, very fortunate. Yes, and the Constitutional Court agreed with that legal ruling. So it's quite interesting to see how even a sort of mediocre law, just like the civil union law, it started a process of different lawsuits that actually resulted in full marriage equality. And in a country such as Austria, that has had center-right majorities in every election since 1983. Austria is not a progressive country, generally speaking. but getting good compromises and then keeping on the activism really did help. And by the way, I would disagree just on a minor point with you, Peter. I don't think Austrians are particularly liberal. I think mostly they don't care what their neighbor is doing. And I think not caring also can be quite helpful. Sorry for going on such a monologue.
We couldn't plead guilty on that count. Yeah, we're very, very concerned and involved with what the neighbor is doing.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Which works very well, but which also does not work very well. I wonder if, Navtej, you have something to say after what Moritz said. Any observations? Navtej?
Not particularly, no.
I'll jump in, and
on the legal front, how far do you think we are from even the next step?
I'm not hearing more.
How hopeful are you?
But I'll just deal with what he said. It's very interesting to me just how different we are from Austria in that, because he gave the example of how the courts followed the trend of the legislature. So you had a defective law, which was then remedied by the courts, but at least you had a base to start off with. A defective law was nevertheless something. In our case, I honestly cannot imagine our legislature passing any form of a civil union law. And this is not a party political thing, because from 1950, after the constitution came and we had our own parliament, till 2018, 70 years, all kinds of parties have come. None of them legislature never thought it right even to repeal Section 377. Something as basic as making homosexuality a crime was not a priority for the legislature. So I don't see that this will ever happen through the act of parliament. It's not a priority at the one extreme, but more realistically, there will be an outright hostility, because unlike your dispute between Peter and Moritz, I can certainly say that our politicians are a lot more conservative than the civil society, right? So I can't imagine politicians coming up and passing a law on civil union. It's not going to happen. So for that, we have to rely on courts. I think our system would be very similar to the American system, right? The European system has been different as to by a trend of movement within the civil society, the courts taking some decisions, referendums happening certain elsewhere. Ireland, for instance, where you had marriage through a popular referendum. Now, our experience, I think, will be like the US, where if at all, the politicians are hostile to LGBTQI rights, to queer rights, but it is the courts which step in. So I think we'll do well to remember that it was only as late as 2003 that the US Supreme Court struck down the anti-sodomy laws in the US. Yeah. We think it's a very progressive country, and Sunil and Navtej gave that instance of how they could not hold hands in New York. But so that was our country, I think, has that same history. But it's important also, therefore, to realize that while in 2003 came the ruling in the US about sodomy, it took only about a decade for the gay marriage judgment to come, Oberg fell in 2016, about 10 years. I think, and I'm hopeful, that it will happen sooner rather than later in our country. I know Professor Pant said that he is not so sanguine about about courts, about how, but I think the courts get a lot of bad press. Some of it is warranted, but a lot of it is, I think, also unfair. I think our courts are doing a good job. They generally are a lot more liberal than they are given credit for. They will be, as I think Peter said earlier, that they are a product of society. Judges are a product of society, right? They don't descend from Mars and the moon, and we can't expect judges to be suddenly extremely liberal. But there is a liberal streak definitely within the judiciary. So I'm quite hopeful that when the matter comes up next week for hearing in the Delhi High Court, we'll get something. If not now, I can't look. You need to be an astrologer in India to decide when a case will be finished. Yeah, either a very, very patient person, because We may get justice, but my God, is it delayed at times. But I think generally, in the end, all things considering, and I'm a lawyer, so I add these caveats, they get it right. They get it right. Now, will it happen in my lifetime? I think yes.
Saurav, how far do you think we are from getting gay judges, for instance, in the Supreme Court or the High Court?
Well, it's work in progress in terms of. I'd rather not speak on that because of my personal reasons, as you well know, Sunil and Navtej. So it's better not.
I was wondering about that. Because the polity is, I mean, we do. Well, that's another story altogether.
That's another day for another time.
Yeah, another day. Moritz, Anna, Peter, observations?
Yes, I would like to ask, because you said you see it positively, in Europe, what we face at the moment and what makes me a bit pessimistic is the backlash. We do have certain movements, for example, in countries like Poland or Hungary, which we didn't experience as an LGBTIQ community before, that are concentrating on they're actively lobbying against us, and this is something we didn't experience before in Austria 40 years history of LGBTIQ movement. We did have like certain opponents, let's say like the Catholic Church and more who were like against the movement and the LGBTIQ rights, but never like active movement that is really concentrated on how to stop our lobbying and things like that. So this is what we don't have actively in Austria, but definitely in Poland and Hungary. So my question would be, how is it with this kind of movements in India? Do you also have this, and how do you see this in relation to the general movement for LGBTIQ rights?
Saurav, you'd be best qualified to answer that.
Right. I'd love to be in a happy place where there was a possibility of a blowback. You have a reaction to only something you have a freedom to do. We're at an unhappy stage where we don't have those freedoms. So yes, I do foresee a time when we will get more and more freedoms and there may be a blowback. But just as an equivalent, when we had the judgment of Section 377 being read down, that was a seminal moment for us. I suppose that was the closest we could come. The reaction at that point from civil society was overwhelmingly positive. There was no blowback whatsoever. Now that could be because it was such a minimal right that was being given. So like you can't start, you come across really bad if you say, let's put all queer people in jail, right? But it wasn't that. I think it harks back to what Navtej said about the nature of homophobia in India. We as a country don't hate homosexuals for the same reason as there is a hatred of homosexuals in the West, especially the Christian West. You see, there is an article of faith. It comes from religion. For us, it's not like that. It's not intrinsic to our religion, at least the Hindus. Of course, we have a substantial Muslim minority and Christian minority, but generally, since a large percentage of the country is Hindus, so I'm talking of that. So there isn't a kind of a homophobia there. So we did not have a blowback at all. On the other hand, and what I've seen in the last 2 years is that society is becoming more and more open and more receptive to gay rights, to queer rights. It's I think there is that difference. What happens when the queer community gets more and more rights? We shall have to see. But this kind of petulance that exists in certain other parts, I don't think exists in India because I don't want to say it because, it sounds like some Indian exceptionalism, but we generally, we don't, well, let's put a more minimal statement that I'll make. We don't hate homosexuals, right? We're too busy hating each other on the basis of caste and of religion. We have many other factors and fissures in society. We do. So I can't say the Indians we love everyone. We're like teddy bears, general large teddy bears who love everything. No, we are not, right? We are as human as everybody else. We have our own fault lines of what we hate someone else for, who we make the other. Homosexuals are not that. The queer community is not that. That could be because, as Professor Pandit said earlier, is about our cultural history, but because we have many instances of gods and goddesses being gender fluid, I think there will be greater acceptance, but who can predict the future? It doesn't take much to generate animosity. But I think we are so irrelevant just now that it's not worth anyone's while to make you hate the queer community. It's just so pointless. There's so many more people to hate.
If I might interject on a lighter note, I cannot, so much of religion has been discussed here. I cannot help but think of Maggie Smith, who said the last word on the subject as far as I'm concerned, where she said, religion is like your penis. I'm delighted you have it. It's only when you wave it in my face that I have a problem with it. Which really sums it all up for me in terms of religion and sexuality. Or anything else really.
There's something I'd like to say actually there. I think Mr. Kirpal, you're really right because in as well in Austria, in Germany, in all countries we have stronger connections to. I'm actually a German citizen, not an Austrian citizen. We had the development that that sometimes the acceptance of something comes with the law. I know that the numbers for Germany before gay marriage was introduced, I think 80% of people were against it because they weren't used to it or it just sounded not so familiar. But now we have like 90% of Germans are pro the gay marriage. So we have this development that comes with the law and people getting used to it, and it's like the coming out. It's like the coming out thing. It's like they know some people. It's happening in every town hall. People, gay couples are getting married. This is the one thing. And another thing I wanted to say to the which is, we're also not living in fairy tale land. There's a study among queer people in Vienna that about 80% of Viennese people, of Viennese queer people, get experienced homophobic slurs in public. So what Mr. Navtev said that that he doesn't experience it. This is something that happens in Austria very well, and especially if you consider that Austria is like one of the safest countries on earth. This amount of abuse is actually pretty concerning, also. So it's not all perfect in Austria.
I must confess to you that I launched a British lad magazine in India, which was one of the most outrageously heterosexualized magazine ever. It was like a young lad's Playboy or something, and I was the editor. And I had the owners telling me, this is a full-blooded magazine. We'd like a full-blooded editor to edit it and put it out there. Somebody who enjoys women as much as the magazine does. And I said, I really need to tell you, I lived with my partner over the last 20 years and never been happier. But on the other hand, what I can give you over here is a more dispassionate viewpoint, which might actually help your magazine. So this comes up in the context of discrimination. In ordinary circumstances, I shouldn't have got the job, but I did get the job. So there is something to be said for that.
I just want to add something to Peter. Peter, it's not, there are people in India also, there are homosexual slurs that are exchanged and heard in India as well. But I'm just saying that I personally have just been strangely, either I haven't registered them or I haven't received them, is just to show that that's also a possibility. That's also a reality in India. But not to say that, there is no homophobia or homosexual slurs in India, that they are also there.
Peter,
I'm sorry, I would like to interject with a question, if I may. Sorry. I think, Saurav, you said there is just no political party whatsoever that would even pretend to care about LGBTIQ issues or rights. Basically, what we have seen that it has been very effective as the activist community, to basically approach the parties that claim to be progressive and for equality and human rights and all those nice and good things in the world. It basically tried to force them in public to say, well, here is a human rights issue. What do you think about that? Is there any development on that front? Basically, how's the interaction between the activist community and political parties? Yeah, basically, how's that going in India?
It's increasing, Mars. It really is. So, for instance, to take the trans community in South India, in the states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, particularly, there's a very large section of community, and they have been given political power. They've been recognized by the regional parties of that particular province in India, and they have therefore engaged with them. So when I say political parties do not find it, do not engage with the community, I mean the national parties. So these are at least these the regional parties do engage. And even in that, I think there has been somewhat of a progressive movement in the national parties. So for instance, the last manifesto, there was some elections in 2019 happened and the parties released their manifesto, and the Congress party had made at least some lip service towards what they would do for the queer community. Now, I think that's lip service because the party is in power in many provinces in India, and they could have put their money where their mouth is and enacted policies in the provinces and actually done something. But yes, there is now at least, prior to 2018, before Navtej's judgment, and we must thank Navtej and Sunil, they are underselling themselves by saying that they were really courageous people who came forward and allowed a petition to be filed in their names. But I think that brought a sea change in how the entire country, including the political class, would engage with the community. Because prior to that, there was a threat of criminality over us, right? You could go to jail for being queer. It was not often used, but the Damocles sword was on your head. So after 2018, this process of engagement has started. And I'm not saying that we will never come to a point where we will be able to engage with political parties. I'm sure that will come. But that degree of maturation, that degree takes time, I think. 2018 to 2021 is enough time to bring a change in society in a country where the median age is 21, right? So young people are seeing developments outside India through the net, through television, through our own Supreme Court. They will be quick to change. So civil society will change quickly. The politics will take its own time because, for one, it's not manned, and I deliberately say manned because hardly any women in politics, manned by older people. They are more conservative. They answer to different constituencies. So yes, I take your point, and maybe we should, as activists, learn to engage with political parties, and an attempt has been made, but it's not going to be easy.
Would I be right to say, Saurav, that we are low on the priority scale of political parties? We're not quite focused towards.
Yes, that's certainly true. I just give you the simple example of an anti-discrimination code. There is no comprehensive anti-discrimination code which protects women. Women are half the electorate.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
If you add to that the lower castes, the minorities. So basically, everyone who needs protection against discrimination is everyone other than upper caste men in India. And that would be about 85% of the population needs protection. And yet we don't have an anti-discrimination code. So obviously, electoral strength is not sufficient to bring about change in the thinking of political parties.
And we also don't have what is the equivalent of a strong pink dollar. You don't have a strong pink rupee either.
Outer numbers.
Yeah.
We're not a very large amount of queer community who are open, who are out there, who are engaging and be willing to be engaged with. Pink dollar doesn't, it's like a pink cent, not a pink dollar.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I would be happy to conclude it right there, but I would welcome insights from Anna, from Peter, from Moritz, the view from the other side. What is the news you have of us over there? What is the perception you guys have of us and our struggle in this part of the world? What has traveled to you so far? I'd be curious.
If you could give us your experience and what do you think? How did things change for Austria? What was that one thing that made the biggest change, I think, if you can tell us?
Yeah, that would be a milestone moment.
One thing Moritz already mentioned, it was the I think it was 2001 or 3 or something. When was the civil union? I don't know that.
No, that not that early. That was the law was passed in 2009 and it came into effect in 2010.
Sorry, 10 years difference. Sorry.
But I think 2001 was the German civil union law.
Yeah, I always mix those up. Okay, this is the one thing. This was like one of the biggest steps, politically spoken. What I have to say, and this is I'm now coming from the angle of being in touch with queer youth in Vienna, because I was the head of the queer youth group for about 10 years or something. I think the biggest step that's happening right now is a change in generations, because if you look at the kind of the young queer people between 13 and 19, the self-assurance they have, the determination they have on their own rights, on how they how they're percepting the society, this is going to make a big change when they are like adults and changing society. There was actually in our organization, there was one little conflict like a few weeks ago or whatever. Like one of our younger people actually fought in court about being harassed in during Pride. He was obviously gay, and someone kind of insulted him and abused him verbally, and so he went to court against that. And the thing is that one of our own activists, like an older one, said, "Yeah, why do you care? Yeah, you were just insulted. Everyone is getting insulted. Why do you care?" So, and I think this is a good example how generations, even among activists, are changing. That like older activists are like, "Hey, we can be glad to have some rights and everything, and not being beaten to death." But the younger ones, they are saying, "No, I won't be insulted in public. I will go to court against that."
Bravo,
and I think
bravo,
this is,
bravo.
yeah, and he was like, I don't know, he was like 19 at the time. Like, I think it was a few months ago when the guy was actually verurteilt. The word is sentenced to a financial fine, actually 500 euros for everyone. So this was actually a good thing to see that these young people want to fight for their rights, and this is kind of the development I'm very optimistic about.
I would like to add, when it comes to the history of LGBTIQ movement in Austria and what were like the main steps and the main achievements, I would definitely agree with Peter that the registered partnership and opening up the marriage 2019 was a big step. It was really like in all medias, and it was very, very present in all parts of society. But previous to that, it was there were more steps to take, as it's about 40 years of history of the LGBTIQ movement, and the moment where homosexuality was decriminalized in Austria was like in the 70s. So I would say this was definitely one first step, and then it started with fighting the Sonderstrafrechtsparagraphen, which is
discriminatory part of the penal code.
Exactly. We had some which had a different age of consent for homosexuals than heterosexual couples. So our organization, our association, was fighting for that many years. It was one of our main topics, and afterwards, when they have been step by step taking back, that was a big achievement. And right now, what is the next big step and a very important issue in Austria is the legal gender recognition for intersex and trans people. So as you know, we just recently have a very activist had a big success, and this is internationally quite big, that we have the possibility of 6 different gender markers to put it into your passport as an intersex person, right? So this has been fought through 2018, and yeah, so this is like the big achievement at the moment.
Interesting.
Maybe to get back to your question, Sono, I think what's also been really making a huge difference is always when celebrities or other people in public have come out. You know, be that politicians, be that actors, be that just television personalities, because very often even people who are not well informed politically, who don't really care about issues such as this, they will follow certain parts of pop culture, and then the people who have never thought about it in their entire lives, who basically just assume, okay, well, if there is a law making it illegal, there will probably be a reason for it. But most people really don't have the time to think about every single law there is on the books. So once they are forced to think about it, because basically they're confronted through other means and in other areas of their life with it, that really has made a huge difference. And I think it's basically the same as coming out in your personal life. And that's also why Pride as a movement has been so important, to have a Pride parade every year. We've only started with Pride parades in 1996. Just for historical context, progress has been very slow in Austria as well. In the pre-World War II era, Austria had one of the strictest criminalizations in all of Europe of homosexual people. During the Nazi era, they were particularly harshly persecuted. After 1945, it was still criminalized, and the victims of Nazi persecutions were not recognized as victims because they were only homosexuals. Then in 1971, there was decriminalization. So things take time. And I think we need to be patient. And at the same time, it's good that there are always other people who are not patient, like Peter said. Basically, we need to be patient, but it's good to still be outraged.
Yeah, it has to be a combination of both, yes. Because
Festina, as they say in the musical terms, Festina lented. Go fast. Go fast slowly.
Well, on that happy note, I would be delighted to conclude this session. go fast, slowly, whether on the Austrian side or the Indian side, and worldwide actually. Thank you everybody for being with us, and thank you Matthias, thank you Moritz, thank you Peter, thank you Anna, thank you Pushpesh, thank you Saurabh, and thank you Natesh, of course. Thank you everybody for being here. And Munish, thank you for giving us this opportunity and getting us all together.
Thank you very much, Sunil. Sunil, I think so you'll have to do the mandatory ceremony still was there, and that is the Q&A session, you see. So I think so I'll be obliged if you could also conduct that, for another 10 minutes or so, a Q&A session.
Would that be? What would this be?
I mean, in this only, if you can, because there are other participants also.
Oh, yes, I'd love to. Oh, yes, of course.
So they would like to ask some questions to our panelists, to you, to Navtej, to our Austrian guests.
Thank you. Yes, please. Let's throw it open.
Anybody who would like to make kindly, yeah. Oh, we have Sushmita here. Sushmita is also Indian classical dancer, and she's sociologist, and at the moment she's assistant professor in Amethi University. So Shmita, you'll have to unmute and then ask a question.
Hi.
Which Sunil will be.
Hello.
Hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Good evening. I think this is a very enriching and very informative discussion, and I won't take much of time, but it's more of an observation and sort of out of my curiosity as someone who's been writing about Indian classical dance forms and masculinity. That's something I wrote as part of my dissertation, and my question and observation is kind of directed to Navtej sir. First of all, huge fan. I repeatedly watch Ranjha. So huge fan. So my question as a sociologist and as a performing artist, I perform Kathak, is that I clearly see the Indian classical dance form in this codification of Natya Shastra also is very gendered. It has that gender construct and deconstruct, and I feel that it reveals a very complex consideration of gender. So in fact, as a performing artist, when I was a student and also as a performing artist now, I see my male dancers, my male dancing friends at a very critical juncture. They, in terms of their profession, as it is, performing arts is not a very celebrated profession in Indian households. However, we want our kids, our students to learn Indian dance forms. For a male to come out from some part of India to central Delhi to learn dance form and consider that as a profession, it's quite difficult for them. It's very complex for them. So I just wanted to understand your experience as an Indian classical dance artist. How do you see the construction and deconstruction in the Indian classical dance form, and what are your observations to that?
That's a kind of a detailed question, and I think it requires a longish answer. But I'll try to be short. I think I will. First of all, I don't think if the Natya Shastra is gendered or the texts are as gendered as they are made out to be. First of all. Because as a dancer, I don't know, people, you see, I'm a little hesitant because people here don't quite might not be familiar with Indian dance. But as an Indian dancer, I go on stage the way I'm looking, and then I play act different roles. I play act a role of a woman, a man, a bird, a river, a tree, a snake, everything. So to me, the crux of Indian dance is the fluidity between different entities, so to speak, of being different, being nobody and everybody at the same time. So this whole binary of gender doesn't even exist. I mean, I can be just as given. I can make my bearded body as available to becoming a young woman as a demon. So this thing of the genderizing of the texts that you're talking about is a construct, is again, it comes up in the reconstruction of the dance within the nationalist movement. So it's the nationalist project of genderizing and creating this hierarchy. So first of all, I think we have to demolish that construct which comes up over the last 50 years, because the texts are really liberal. The texts are profoundly liberal. And Natyashastra is not the only text that we can follow. There are other texts as well. So I don't want to go into much detail. Does that answer your question a little bit, Sushmita?
Yes.
And there was another thing that you asked me, which was that how do I...
so about the profession of performing arts profession, and for, like I used to...
Yeah. You see, I think this is something that it's a problem that... I mean, I see my straight male dancers being really uptight, and they only want to dance as men. They don't want to kind of, show their feminine side because they're playing male. Whereas on the other hand, I've also seen, more so in the past than today, that my queer dance friends want to outdo women when they dance. And both of those are extremely problematic. Dance is not a forum for me to express my femininity alone. Dance is there to express my fluidity. Dance is not a cover-up for me to let my homosexual side come out only. I'm more than homosexual. I'm fluid. Beyond my male and female entities, I am fluid. And dance is, or art is for me, that abstraction of fluidity. So I guess it's how we explain, how we define these things for ourselves. But I know what exactly you mean. This thing of queer dancers who it can be challenging for them as well. Equally for male dancers who are straight, because the straight dancer doesn't want to be identified as being queer or suspected of being queer. And the queer dancer thinks that this is perhaps, and I could be wrong, that this is the domain of the feminine. Dance is not feminine. Dance is fluid. And fluidity is feminine. That's a different story. Fluidity is feminine. But that takes you into a different ballgame altogether. It goes beyond gender. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You are the Conchita Wurst of the dance world, Navtej.
Sorry?
You are the Conchita Wurst of the dance world.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question for Saurav and Pushpesh ji. We see the figurines of LGBT on our temples. We have it on our scripts and all. When did it become a stigma? And what took so long that we had to really come into forefront, and with so many years and decades till 377 was active, was pronounced. My question is open to both of you. Whosoever would like to respond, I'll be grateful.
I'd like to respond to at some point.
Thank you.
Then perspective, you go ahead first.
No, I think what Navtej has said leaves very little to be added to. I think he makes a very interesting point that the Nataraj icon, the great Chola bronze, is Shiva dancing his Tandav. And the male-female binary in Indian dance doesn't exist. I think to go back to your second question, we forget a person like Uday Shankar. We forget the Sakhi Bhav Bhakti in the Indian tradition. We have Krishna being dressed into a sari and being made fun of during the Holi. The great Thumri is sung along that. You remember Birju Maharaj depicting Bhav Abhinay and becoming with his bulky body close to 80, even when he's jeans clad, and he makes a different reality come alive. So I think I'm very excited about what Navtej said. When you go on a stage as a dancer, you are totally fluid in your gender identity. You could be a bird, a river. I remember Indrani Rahman dancing way back in 65 with Dheer Samire Yamuna Tire Vasati Vane Vanamali. And the gestures of her hand evoked Jamuna, evoked a breeze, evoked Krishna, evoked flute playing, everything, that magical moment. So I think art is beyond gender binaries. That's number one. And I think the second question, very briefly, I think Saurabh can take it much better than I can. This stigmatization, I think, is a state of mind. We are talking of a very small, microscopic, English-educated elite, partly public school, who were exposed to this vice anglaise. The British called it the English vice, and we forget that Britain itself, in 60s, after Wolfenden Commission report, had decriminalized homosexuality. It was not a crime against nature. We continue to do so, blindly following the English law. So I think I'll leave it at that. And I think this is stigmatization. Now, my last thing, one of my horrors is that the Talibanization of Hinduism, dogmatic fanaticism, might lead to us a state where the younger generation might say, oh, this is a vice which came with the Turco-Afghan Muslim invaders. They had the boy Ketamites, they had the Sufis had their chelas, and forget about the earlier past. So I think this stigmatization. And then I think something about the male bonding, holding hands, people who had male bonding like kabaddi. In Banaras, you have a tradition where you could neck pet and you could be flaunting your maleness and still have a very nice relationship.
I'll just take a very short time because I think Navdesh would be best placed to answer really the history. But Indian history is complex on this front as regards its acceptance of homosexuality. If you see the Kama Sutra, there's a very famous Sutra 36, which talks of oral sex between men, and it says that is sadharan, i.e. ordinary, right? So there was a degree of acceptance of sexual acts between men going as far back as the Kama Sutras, which was one of the 3 treatises of the Arthashastra, Kama Sutra, and the come back. So, and yes, you have images in temples, you have stories from Shikhandi to in Indian mythology, all dealing with gender fluidity at the very least, same-sex relationship on another. But, you know, there's also a school of thought which says that this was accommodative rather than accepting. So the issue of sexuality, we knew it existed, it was tolerated, but it wasn't rejoiced either, right? My role as a lawyer today is not to hark back to the past and see what it was. I am more concerned about 1950, when we gave our constitution to ourselves. I don't care what my past was. I don't care what Hindu mythology said, because I don't want a tom-tomism, as Pushpesh said. Because when you say Hindu culture was great, you will have someone who will say it's the Muslims who caused it or the British who caused this, and it may well be. But what I do know is that after we got the constitution in 1950, it's us, right? It's no one else at that point of time. It's taken us 70 years to come to this place. Because it's taken us 70 years because we've harked to the past always. I think this is the time to look to the future. And the only way to look to the future is to look to that liberal document, which we all swear an allegiance to, our constitution. We look into our own hearts and our own conscience, and we change things. Forget the past. No recriminations. It's pointless. It will not help us. And we don't all want to turn into scholars of history, because everything you'll find one way, you'll find something else. Absolutely. Don't go down that narrow path. Look to the future. That's all I say.
Very well put, sir. Very well put.
Very well.
Yeah. I'll just be very, very brief, and I just want to answer, address this to the stigmatization that you picked up. You mentioned, Manish, and I think the stigmatization is not only about homosexuality. And I just to mention that there are reliefs, there are explicit reliefs in the Khajuraho, at least, of homosexual acts, so to speak. But the stigmatization that happens in this country, and I would say go again back to the 19th century, is the stigmatization of sexuality, not homosexuality. Sexuality becomes a problem. We came up with this thing of wanting to be more moral than the Victorian moral. And that is what brought us here. We wanted to outdo Victorian morality. And by that, we kind of in almost like twisted our text saying, you know, the texts say this. So the problem is sexuality. We wanted to stigmatize sexuality, and homosexuality, of course, was incidental. It didn't even matter, actually. So it is, and I feel today, if Peter was saying, even in India, I deal with many young people who don't give a damn about whether you are gay or straight. I mean, they have just come out into sexuality, be it straight or queer. So people are kind of owning up their sexuality and very easy with it today in ways that my generation was not. And it's got nothing to do with homosexuality. It's just got to do with sexuality. Sexuality has suddenly become all right in ways that it was not all right earlier. So I just want to say it's sexuality and not just homosexuality that was the problem. Yeah.
That's guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sunil, I think so you can wrap up if anybody else is to ask.
On that happy note, I think we could conclude. And of course, I love what Saurav said. Go fast, slowly. Go fast, slowly. And I couldn't agree more with Natej when he says sexuality per se is what started being frowned upon. It had nothing to do with homosexuality. So many thanks to the Austrian side for joining us, Moritz and Peter and Anna. And thank you, Matthias, for the opportunity. Thank you, Manish, for the opportunity, giving us the opportunity to be together and talk to each other. Thanks very much indeed. And I look forward to more exchanges like this. Thank you, Manish, for making it possible.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody. And there are a couple of thanks which we wanted to say to everybody. So, I mean, we have made a list out of here so nobody gets missed out. And I hope something nice comes out in future of this particular movement. Thank you, everybody, for it. Mr. Radostich, you'd like to say something on that note, or we just end up the session?
So I can just very shortly say thank you for all the participants. It was important to us to bring together activists from both countries to start an exchange. I think we have achieved that, and we will see how we take it from there. So thank you very much for everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Nice
you so
meeting
much.
everybody. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.